Hi, I'm Pat Keon, a research analyst here with Lipper, and I'm here to speak to you about fund flows for the week ended Wednesday, August 13th. For the week, the Dow Jones Industrial Average experienced gains of 1.3%. It's a bit of a bounce back week for the Dow, as it had been down about 4.5% since its record high close of over 17,100 points on July 16th. Factors contributing to this downturn were the geopolitical unrest, specifically Russia and the Ukraine, as well as fears on the street that the Fed may seek to raise rates sooner than anticipated. Turning our attention back to fund flows now, overall for the week, we saw positive net flows of $15 billion. Let's take a closer look at our macro groups now. Equity mutual funds experienced net outflows of $162 million. Taxable bond funds, net inflows of $1.9 billion. Muni bond funds also had net inflows, $589 million, while money market funds led the way with net inflows of $9.3 billion. Let's take a closer look at our equity mutual fund group now. The $162 million in outflows marked the third consecutive week of outflows for the group. Continuing the trend that we've seen for most of the year, non-domestic equity took in roughly $400 million, while we saw outflows from the domestic equity category as they saw $500 million leave their coffers. Moving on to our equity ETF categories now. They took in $1.4 billion on the week. This was a mixture of, we saw some big net inflows as well as some big outflows. Leading the way for the inflows was the SPDR S&P 500 ETF. They took in $3.3 billion on the week. This is in direct contrast to the outflows we saw last week, while on the sell side, the iShares Russell 2000 ETF had $1.4 billion leave their coffers. Let's take a closer look at our taxable bond mutual fund category now. As stated previously, they took in $1.9 billion on the week. This was a bounce back from last week, where they had their first net outflows of the year. Leading the way, also in direct contrast to last week, was high yield funds. They had net inflows of roughly $500 million on the week, while last week we saw $5.8 billion leave the group. And for the year to date, the group is down $9.6 billion. Also, within the taxable bond mutual fund, we saw core plus bond funds take in $200 million. Moving on to our taxable bond ETFs now. The group had net inflows of $1.9 billion, as we saw a roughly 1-to-1 split between the inflows from the taxable bond mutual funds and the taxable bond ETFs. This marked the fourth consecutive week of inflows for ETFs. High yield was also the story here as well. The iShares iBoxx High Yield Corporate Bond ETF, or HYG, led the way with $430 million in inflows. Let's take a closer look at our muni bond funds now. As stated before, the group took in $589 million for the week. This marked 4 out of 5 weeks of inflows for the group. National funds in the national muni categories took in over $600 million, while funds in the single state muni categories experienced slight outflows for the week. Moving on to our last group now, money market funds. The group took in $9.3 billion overall in the week. Leading the charge were taxable money market funds with $9.7 billion in positive flows. This marked the group's second consecutive week of positive net flows. Also, last week, taxable money markets were also the chief contributor to the positive net flows with $4.7 billion in net inflows. Well, that wraps up this week's report. If you're interested in learning more and taking a close look at the data, please join us at www.lipperusfundflows.com. Please also join us here again next week, where another analyst will be speaking to you about the week's fund flow activity.